All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to trace a really dark path, how Germany went from the end of World War I all the way to a full-blown Nazi dictatorship. It's a story of how a broken peace can lead to something truly terrifying. So, let's start with this, a really chilling quote from Adolf Hitler. He said this back in 1924, right after his first failed attempt to seize power. And right here, this sentence, it basically contains the core grievance that fueled his entire movement. But it begs the question, right? Who exactly were these traitors he's talking about?
Well, he was talking about the November criminals. That was the name he and others gave to the German politicians who signed the armistice to end the war. This created the incredibly powerful and poisonous stab-in-the-back myth, the idea that Germany wasn't actually defeated on the battlefield, but was betrayed by politicians back home.
Now, this feeling of betrayal, this deep resentment, it didn't just appear out of thin air. It was forged in the halls of Paris back in 1919, with the treaty that officially ended the war, but in a lot of ways set the stage for the next one.
You see, at first there was this hope for a fair and just peace, based on the ideas of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, his famous 14 points. People imagined a peace without blame, without victors and vanquished. But what they got was the Treaty of Versailles, which was the exact opposite.
And you have to understand, these terms weren't just political bullet points. To many Germans, this felt like a profound national humiliation. Especially Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. It forced the entire nation to accept the blame for the whole war. This created this deep well of resentment that extremist politicians could tap into for years.
So you've got this entire country just simmering with anger and humiliation. And into this powder keg, Germany attempts to build its very first democracy, the Weimar Republic. It was fragile, to say the least.
I mean, this republic was basically born in crisis and never really got out of it. From day one, it was linked to the shame of the Versailles Treaty. It faced one economic disaster after another, from hyperinflation that made money worthless to the Great Depression that left millions unemployed. And it had this fatal flaw baked right into its constitution, Article 48, which basically gave the president the power to become a dictator in an emergency. It was a tool that Hitler would later use to perfection.
And who steps into all this chaos, promising a simple, radical, and violent solution to a nation that was just desperate for answers? You guessed it, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party.
Now, his first plan was just brute force. The Munich Putsch in 1923 was a failed, almost comical attempt to march on Berlin and just take over. It was a total disaster. But here's the crazy part. That failure taught him a crucial lesson. If you can't overthrow the republic with force, you have to use its own rules to destroy it from the inside.
It's almost hard to believe, but this total failure, he spun it into a massive propaganda victory. His trial became a national stage. He got to stand up in court and rant for hours against the government, against the November criminals, against the treaty. He walked out of that courtroom more famous and with more followers than he had going in.
And so, over the next decade, he built his power. And by 1933, through a mix of public desperation and backroom political deals, he was appointed chancellor. The fox was officially in the henhouse, and he wasted no time at all. The methodical destruction of democracy began almost immediately.
This right here, this is the Nazi playbook in 4 simple steps. First, create a crisis, or at least take advantage of one. The German parliament building burns down. Step 2, immediately blame your enemies, in this case, the communists. Step 3, use the fear from that crisis to convince the government to give you emergency powers. Step 4, use those new powers to eliminate all of your opponents. Just like that, basic rights like freedom of speech were gone overnight.
But even with Germany under his thumb, Hitler wasn't totally secure. He had another problem, and this one was inside his own house. The SA, his army of brown-shirted thugs, had helped him get to power. But their leader, Ernst Röhm, was getting ambitious. With millions of men at his command, he was a potential threat, and Hitler could not stand for any rivals.
So what did he do? He unleashed his personal, fanatically loyal bodyguards, the SS, on the leadership of the SA. In a single bloody weekend, known as the Night of the Long Knives, Röhm and hundreds of other political opponents were murdered. Just a few weeks later, the president died, and Hitler simply combined the two jobs, chancellor and president, into one. He was now the undisputed Führer. His control was total.
So, with all his rivals gone, how did Hitler and the Nazis actually control an entire nation? Well, they started to completely reshape German society from the ground up, and they built it on 3 core pillars. First, there was this simple, powerful slogan you saw everywhere: Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one leader. It was hammered into people's heads constantly. The message was clear. You, the individual, are nothing. The nation, led by Hitler, is everything.
This was all backed up by something called the Führer principle, the leader principle. Think of it like a giant pyramid of absolute obedience. Everyone owed unquestioning loyalty to the person directly above them, all the way up to the top, where Hitler stood alone. His word wasn't just policy, it was literally the law.
And the ultimate goal of all this? To create what they called the Volksgemeinschaft, a so-called people's community. It was sold as this beautiful vision of a racially pure, harmonious society, all Germans working together. But here's the terrifying catch. You could only achieve that harmony by brutally and violently excluding anyone who didn't fit in: Jews, Romani people, political enemies, anyone deemed impure.
And to make all this happen, they used a whole toolkit of control. You had Joseph Goebbels pumping out endless propaganda. You had laws that put every single newspaper under Nazi control. You were rewarded for conforming, with jobs and social status, and if none of that worked, well, that's what the Gestapo, secret police, and the SS were for.
And this control, it didn't stop at the town square. Oh no, it reached right into the family living room. Women were told their job was to stay home and have children for the Reich. Children, kitchen, church. And those kids, from the time they could walk, were funneled into groups like the Hitler Youth, where they were taught to be loyal to Hitler above all else, even their own parents.
So when you look at this whole story, you realize the collapse of German democracy wasn't an accident, it wasn't one single event, it was a methodical, step-by-step process. It was fueled by resentment, it was accelerated by crises, and it was carried out with absolute ruthlessness. And it leaves us with a pretty chilling and timeless question to think about.